Hello! It is definitely one of those mornings, but I'm going to set all that aside and talk about Harry Potter for a bit. Okay. Two chapters today. That would be Beauxbaton and Durmstrang and the Goblet of Fire. Things are happening on the surface. The topic today is aesthetics. Because that is a whole lot of actually what we're seeing. We haven't yet been able to really dig into any of the events that are occurring, any of the people we're meeting. Right now they're all surface, and the problem is that we are taking them as surface. We are taking them purely aesthetically, when we necessarily shouldn't. Our two champions that are going to appear out of this one that we're really meeting right now, of course, are Victor Krum and Fleur Delacour. And again, we are seeing them purely aesthetically. We know Krum is a Quidditch champion. Same. Fleur Delacour. At least part Vila. Pretty. Even the schools are really doing this. One of the notes we actually get is how Hogwarts changes its Great Hall. They have the nice banners up. Aesthetic. McGonagall tells Ron to straighten his hat, and tells Parvati, yeah, it is Parvati, to take this ornamental butterfly that she has in her hair out. Very little of it is actually anything deeper than that, and in fact, McGonagall is actually further encouraging this aesthetic view by scolding Neville of don't let them know you can't do a simple switching spell. Despite the fact that Neville's probably pretty traumatized because he's just transported his ears onto a cactus, which can't be comfortable. We have this idea that we need to look pretty to be respectable. And if you can't be respectable, at least look pretty. Like, no one's being encouraged here to show off more than the surface, but to definitely hide their faults behind that surface. In fact, the aesthetic is now becoming a protective shield for all of these people. It's how they're going to survive. Or at least try to. Harry's already running into this because aesthetically he is the boy who lived. His most notable feature is the scar on his forehead, and that has to be difficult for him, because you can either learn to deal with it and use it as a shield, use what you have to protect yourself, which I get the feeling is what Krum is doing. Or you want to reject it just as much as everybody else does, which is sort of the position Harry's in, because Harry's already sort of ridden out this on-again, off-again love affair that the public has with him. He's either the golden boy or he's the outcast. And it's difficult, I think, for him to then use his fame as a shield if it's turning on him constantly. I don't think Krum necessarily has had to deal with that. I think Fleur is running into that, because even with the surface reading that we're getting here, she's dealing with a lot. She's dealing with the boys like Ron just turning purple and trying to always look at her. And she's also dealing with the fact that necessarily then a lot of the girls are going to probably be jealous. We have girls who burst into tears when Fleur is chosen as champion. We don't get a report of anything like that with the Durmstrang students. Again, the question is, aesthetically, is that true, or is it because Victor has learned to use his fame to sort of keep himself safe from reactions like that? It's hard to tell, again, because we're only getting the aesthetics. But the thing is, we can't write the aesthetics off. A lot of times, particularly if you don't necessarily feel beautiful yourself, you want to reject that beauty in others. Which is why I've actually had an entire class that focused on how beauty and philosophy actually connect together, and how they can work to help each other, how beauty can actually be used to help other virtues, which isn't necessarily something we consider now. A lot of times we look at beauty and think vapid and vain. It's something we often want to reject or completely idolize. And the moment that beauty is flawed in any way, then we're necessarily again going to either reject it or try and consolidate that flaw with our idea of beauty. We don't like having this cognitive dissonance in our head that says this beautiful thing isn't completely beautiful. You're either completely beautiful and that's all you are, or you're not and other things matter, which I don't think is what we can actually do in this situation. We have to recognize that the aesthetic is there, but there is stuff below that, without rejecting the aesthetic. There are a few things in the set of chapters that's actually pointing us towards an acceptance of these things together. The most notably is Durmstrang's name. Okay, so it is actually deeply connected to literature and musical and art movement from Germany called Sturm und Drang. I apologize, I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. Literally storm and drive, known storm and urge, or storm and stress, which is actually a specific type of movement that's coming in around the time with the Romantics, sort of a little before. So we're looking 1760s to 1780s, where we're actually putting a face to emotional extremes, individual subjectivity, and sort of looking at how rationalism has tightened its hold, and a lot of times rejecting that and saying there's something more, not just this rationalism. There's something to the aesthetic that we actually need to consider. I would like to thank one of my professors who I helped TA with for actually pointing that out originally. That was sort of like, poof, and then reading these chapters again, I was like, the aesthetic is everywhere. So Sturm und Drang is telling us that we can't rationalize everything, which seems to be sort of what Hermione is doing in this moment. And we're not jiving with her for the most part right now. And even if we are, a lot of the other students aren't. But we also can't surface read everything, because that's going to cause some problems. Such as Kakarov, who has a pure aesthetic of a friendly old man with a fruity voice, whose smile does not reach his eyes. My friends and I have met somebody like this, and he was utterly terrifying. Because the moment you disagreed with him, you could see the smile was still on his face, but his eyes just went dark. And that is frightening. And we didn't want to be around this person. and we rapidly tried to get away from him, especially when we saw those eyes got dark. So we cannot, if we just go for the aesthetics, then we are underestimating a lot of these people. But that's true of if we just go for what's beneath, and if we reject the surface, because the surface is actually what we present to the world. And that is a valuable tool that we need to embrace. As much as society tries to dictate what this aesthetic should be, we can reject society's version of this aesthetic, but we can never reject aesthetic completely. There is no possible way to actually present yourself or not present yourself without making an active choice of what your aesthetic is going to be. Consider then the Goblet of Fire. And here is where I disagree with the choice that the movies made. It's not the first time, and it certainly won't be the last, but we have what is visually a very interesting Goblet of Fire. It's all glassy and blue, and not at all what we actually get described in the book. Here we go, the Goblet of Fire. So we have, geez, where's the proper casket? Okay, so the casket is a great wooden chest encrusted with jewels, looking extremely old. So, aesthetically, pretty old, ancient, mystical. And then we have the actual Goblet of Fire. So Dumbledore now took out his wand, tapped 3 times on the top of the casket. The lid creaked slowly open. Dumbledore reached inside and pulled out a large, roughly hewn wooden cup. What? It would have been entirely unremarkable had it not been full to the brim with dancing blue-white flames. And there it is. Part of the aesthetic is relatively normal. Part of the aesthetic is freaking amazing. And somehow it results in an artifact that is able to take in many names, then select the best competitors for this event. So not purely aesthetic, but also not purely rational. The combination. But it's allowing not just for a pretty aesthetic, it's allowing for a balance between the amazing side you show and the normal side. The Goblet of Fire, the actual namesake for this book, most notably, is showing us that aesthetic is important, but it is not the end-all and be-all. Nor does that aesthetic have to be necessarily amazingly brilliant. We need to have a balance between these versions. And then we need to be able to go deeper without, again, rejecting that exterior. Your exterior and your interior have to be balanced really well, which in theory is actually part of what the cup is selecting. All of these people are conventionally attractive. Cedric, Ron keeps calling a pretty boy, again, an aesthetic yet somehow insulting comment. We of course have Fleur, who is very beautiful. We have Crumb, who again seems to have an attractiveness to him that maybe isn't necessarily just his fame. and his ability as a Quidditch player. I think there might be some physical attractiveness to him. And then there's Harry, who theories I've heard about this suggest that what actually happened is simply a fourth school was entered into the Goblet, and Harry's name is the only one applicable to that school. But I'm not actually sure. I'm not sure we ever get an answer of how Barty Crouch Jr. hoodwinked the Goblet of Fire. But again, I think Harry steps up enough to prove that he was a worthy champion in that. I mean, he fights and he wins. Yeah, it's an interesting balance of aesthetic right now. And we're gonna start getting the deeper stuff shortly. But we need to pay attention that the first thing we're actually presented with is the aesthetic. And the Goblet of Fire, which we are presented with at the very start with the title, is letting us know that the aesthetic, along with the rational, cannot be underestimated. Next time, we meet our champions more fully. It's gonna be fun. Okay. Short exit here. I've now got other things I have to go and figure out. Yay. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.